So now turning to today, Ann Pearson, who has been a friend of mine for many years. We served on the ABS board together back in the 90s, has a PhD in religious studies, specializing in South Asian religions such as Hinduism. She has taught this in several different universities in Ontario. Also, she has taught gender and religion, world religions in general, Gandhian nonviolence, and various other topics. She's been a Wilman Institute faculty member since the 1990s, particularly with our courses on Hinduism, Buddhism, and also on interfaith dialogue. She lived in India for many years and continues to visit and is involved in organizations that promote women's empowerment and peace building. And today we will hear from her about Hinduism and the Baha'i Faith. So Ann, welcome.
Thank you
for participating in this, and we're really looking forward to your presentation today.
So thank you, Rob, for that introduction, and Boyd for your technical help. And greetings to everyone who is listening in and watching. Welcome to this web talk, which I have called, as you've heard, Sacred Cows, Krishna and the Baha'i Faith, Decoding Hinduism. So in this talk, I'll address the question, why learn about Hinduism? Well, especially why Baha'is may wish to learn about Hinduism. Then I'll review some basic features of this religion, followed by an examination of several key concepts in Hinduism, such as the nature of the divine, the soul, karma, and rebirth, the ultimate goal in life, and the means to achieve that goal. I will also look at who Krishna is. More briefly, I'll review Hindu ethics and social structures, and last, the development of the Baha'i Faith in India. So it's a huge scope. On many of these topics, I will just touch fairly briefly, and I look forward to any questions that you might have at the end. So let me start by saying something about, first about the Om symbol. So here we are decoding Hinduism, or at least explaining some common symbols and practices that you might have encountered. So the Om symbol is commonly used to designate Hinduism. It's the most common symbol, actually, of Hinduism, and it is a mantra presented in a stylized form of the Devanagari script, letters for A-U-M. Om is called the seed mantra, the bija mantra, the primordial sound representing the totality of the universe. The use of mantras in meditation, prayers, and invocations dates back to Hinduism's earliest sacred texts, the Vedas. Mantras are understood to evoke spiritual forces in the universe that one can draw upon during rituals or meditation. When Hindus perform the ritual of waving of the lamp, called arati, at the end of worship at home or in the temple, they often draw the Om symbol in the air with the plate of lit flames. Now, another a topic that people may well be familiar with in relation to Hinduism or India in general are cows and sacred cows. So why are cows sacred? Are they sacred? Today in India, cows can be seen wandering the streets, even the highways, and motorists will go to all lengths to avoid hitting one, as cow slaughter is forbidden and Hindus avoid eating beef. Now, Kamadhenu, the wish-fulfilling cow, is considered the ancestor of all cows and is mentioned in the Vedas. Rig Veda 428.1.6 reads, "The cows have come and have brought us good fortune. In our stalls contented may they stay. May they bring forth calves for us, many-colored, giving milk for Indra each day. You make, O cows, the thin man sleek. To the unlovely you bring beauty. Rejoice our homestead with pleasant lowing. In our assemblies we laud your vigor." Now, the ancient pastoral peoples who created the Vedas describe a man's wealth as consisting of cows and sons. The cow is among the 5 beings that the Rig Veda confers the suffix mata, or mother, on, signifying the reverence with which they should be treated, along with one's own mother. Even today, a house with a cow is considered a prosperous one because a cow provides not just for her calf, but milk, butter, and yogurt that are staples of the Indian diet. She provides dung that is used for fuel and building material, and a cow's urine is said to be purifying and is used in some rituals. Finally, Krishna, one of the most venerated divine figures in Hinduism, is said to have been brought up in a pastoral community, and he is often portrayed as the patron of cows. One of his names, Govinda, translates as one who satisfies the cows. It should be noted, too, that the cow was catapulted into the public arena during the independence movement as a symbol of Hindu nationalism. The cow, like the nation, was glorified as ever-giving mothers who should be protected. So why learn about Hinduism? Why should Baha'is in particular learn about Hinduism? Well, it is one of the oldest and numerically the 3rd largest religion in the world, with about 1 billion adherents. India, the country of the religion's birth, has the largest Baha'i community, an estimated 2 million, with a history of the faith going back to the late 19th century. Finally, Baha'is affirm the status of Lord Krishna as a manifestation of God. While there are apparently no explicit references to Hinduism or to its prophets in the writings of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, there are references in the published talks of Abdu'l-Baha to Krishna. For example, Abdu'l-Baha calls Krishna the cause of the illumination of the world of humanity and confirms that he was sent by God. In letters written to individual believers on behalf of Shoghi Effendi, the prophethood of both the Buddha and Krishna are affirmed, whilst he also cautions that we cannot be sure of the authenticity of the extant scriptures of Buddha and Krishna. So let me turn to general features of Hinduism. The English word Hinduism was coined by the British colonials in the 19th century. The term is an adaptation of a Persian usage of Hindu, itself adapted from an earlier Arabic Sindhu, referring to peoples who lived on the other side of the river Sindh, or Indus, in modern-day Pakistan. A native word for Hinduism is Sanatana Dharma, or eternal religion, duty, law. All of these words are part of the word Dharma, as I'll explain later. The term Hinduism encapsulates multiple traditions that evolved over 3,500 years. The religion has no single founder and no founding date. It is a truism now among scholars of Hinduism to say that Hinduism is a religion or way of life marked by orthopraxy, correct practice, rather than orthodoxy, correct belief. Hindus generally do not define themselves through a common statement of beliefs or by allegiance to a specific set of doctrines. Further, there has never been in the history of Hinduism the equivalent of a pope or supreme religious council that arbitrated on matters of doctrine for all Hindus. Historically, Hinduism has always been highly decentralized. Thus, the term believer, which Baha'is, Muslims, and many Christians often apply to the followers of their faiths, is inappropriate to Hindus. To phrase it simplistically, a Hindu is what a Hindu does, and what a Hindu does is governed for the most part by family and caste traditions. Much of Hindu religiosity takes place in the home, its rituals conducted by family members or by an invited Brahmin priest. Worship in public Hindu temples is optional. Now, the fact that a Hindu can ultimately make up his or her own mind about her beliefs finds accord with the Baha'i principle of the independent investigation of truth. Further, Hinduism's recognition of individual preference and spiritual predilection has led to a traditional tolerance for doctrinal differences and acceptance of the notion that there are multiple ways of knowing, worshiping, and describing the divine. Such a tolerance is also intrinsic to the Bahá'í Faith in the sense that it accepts a variety of ways of knowing and acknowledges both universal truth and relative truth. Abdu'l-Bahá, for example, says, "No one truth can contradict another truth. Light is good in whatever lamp it is burning." What is common to Hindus or Hindu culture is a sacred geography, a land that is crisscrossed by tracks of pilgrimage over the centuries, a shared storehouse of myths and story traditions containing a rich fund of practical and ethical counsel, a shared pantheon of deities and ways of worshiping them, a cluster of philosophical and spiritual concepts, principally Dharma, karma, and samsara, and a universally entrenched, complex, though fluid social structure based on class, varna, and caste, jati. Most Hindus would also accept the corpus of texts called the Vedas, which really means books of knowledge, as the origin for their religion, the basis for the Sanatana Dharma. Though there are many other sacred texts. So the Bhagavad-Gita, which was written quite a bit later than the Vedas, is just one of the many sacred texts in Hinduism. Now I'll turn to key concepts, beginning with the nature of God. At first glance, Hindus appear to believe in many gods. Certainly a visit to a Hindu temple may give this impression, and a cursory read through Hindu sacred stories will acquaint one with a wide variety of names, iconographies, and stories of various deities, male and female, benign, majestic, ascetic, or horrific, some with part animal forms. Many Hindus today, however, will affirm that God is ultimately one, and that the many forms and names of the gods are aspects or symbols of the one formless, eternal God. There have been essentially two major views of the nature of the divine in Hindu religious history. The first view, expressed in many of the speculative texts that constitute the Upanishads, written somewhere between the 8th and 3rd centuries BCE, and articulated systematically in non-dualist Vedantic philosophy, conceives of God, or the absolute, as an abstract, impersonal principle, or simply as absolute reality, the basis for all that is, the one unchanging reality behind the changing, visible world. The most common designation for this attributeless, genderless reality is Brahman. Though the Vedic hymns are directed to numerous gods, there were hints of the one who created the many gods. In another place, the Rig Veda says, "That which is one the sages speak of in various ways." A dialogue between a sage and a student in an early Upanishad reduces the number of gods from 3,306 down to 33, then to 6, 3, 2, 1.5, and finally to 1. Who is the one God? The student asks. Breath. He is called Brahman, the sage replies. Breath, of course, here refers to the life force. Brahman is not generally presented as an object of worship, but of intuitive knowledge and meditation. Brahman is often described in this literature by the use of negatives. Brahman is not this, not that, neti, neti. For Brahman is beyond the perception of the senses. As the Katha Upanishad says, his form is not in the field of vision. No one sees him with mortal eyes. He is seen by a pure heart and by a mind and thoughts that are pure. Those who know him attain immortality. Now, while usually presented as an impersonal principle, however, Brahman is not considered an unconscious one. Rather, Brahman is the supreme conscious reality. Vedantic philosophy speaks of the essence of Brahman as being consciousness, joy, Sat Chit Ananda. The second major view of the divine is a theistic one. God is both the supreme being responsible for the creation, preservation, and dissolution of the universe, which are the three primary functions of God identified in Hindu philosophy, and is personal and in active relationship with his creation. The theist view of God has two major subdivisions. One group of theists understand God to be without form or characteristics. They often prefer to worship God without reference to a physical iconography or image. Other theists prefer to conceive of God through attributes and to worship God in a particular form. The most prominent names or forms of the theist God today are Vishnu, Krishna, Rama, Shiva, Murugan, and the Devi, or the goddess, known by many names, such as Shri Parvati Durga, with Hanuman and Ganesh also being very popular divine figures today. These gods may be worshipped alone or one after another in a group. While most of the Upanishads tend to describe a monistic perspective where Brahman, pervading all that exists, is the only reality, other Upanishads reveal a theistic perspective where God is to be adored as the Lord. In a passage from the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, for example, we find, after we have first venerated the adorable God displaying every form, the source of all being, as residing within one's heart, and then recognized him as the one who bestows righteousness and removes evil, as the Lord of prosperity, as abiding within ourselves in the Atman, as the immortal residing in all beings, we will find this highest God among gods, the highest master among masters, the God beyond the highest as the adorable Lord of the universe. The theistic perspective finds one of its earliest and most profound exposition in the short text of 18 chapters called the Bhagavad-Gita, the Song of the Lord. And what you see in front of you, by the way, is the three faces, the Trimurti in Hindu philosophy, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, one in an ancient stone sculpture about the 13th century, and another in a modern lithograph. And these three faces of God represent those three functions I mentioned before of creation, maintenance, and dissolution of the universe. So the Bhagavad-Gita, called the Song of the Lord, was composed some 2,000 years ago in the form of a dialogue between the warrior Arjuna and his friend and teacher, Krishna. The text eloquently describes the power, glory, mercy, and fearfulness of God, here identified with or through Krishna. There you see them in this picture, Arjuna on his knees in front of Krishna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, this great battle which is the opening of the Bhagavad-Gita between these two great armies who are about to destroy each other. And Arjuna, who is supposed to blow the conch to begin this great battle, looks on one side, he sees his family, his teachers, his friends. He looks on the other side, he also sees former friends, people that he had known as a child, and he is suddenly filled with horror at the idea of engaging in this battle, and he can't do it. And so he turns to Krishna, who is his charioteer, and says, please, I don't ask me to do this. And Krishna then proceeds in the remaining chapters of the Bhagavad-Gita to explain to him not only why he should fight, but the nature of the universe and all in between. So as I said, the text eloquently describes the power, glory, mercy, and fearfulness of God, here identified with or through Krishna. For example, Krishna says, speaking in the voice of Vishnu, of utterances, I am the syllable Om. Of offerings, I am the offering of silent meditation. Of trees, I am the tree of life. Among creators, I am the creator of love. I am the beginning, the middle, and the end of all that is. Of all knowledge, I am the knowledge of self, that is the Atman, or the soul. I am death that carries off all things, and I am the source of all things to come. Know thou that whatever is beautiful and good, whatever has glory and power, is only a portion of mine own radiance. Now, other texts, I'll come back to Krishna later, but other texts praise Shiva or Vishnu or the Devi as the one God who is the supreme creator and ruler of the universe. While many Hindus develop a special relationship with one particular deity, with its own particular characteristics, bodies of myths, prayers, songs, and rites of worship, they readily recognize that other deities may serve the same role as faces of the one God or reality whose true essence is beyond all human comprehension. Now, Baha'is share with Hindus a number of similar ideas about God. Baha'is believe that God is the creator and sustainer of the universe. Yet, like the poets of the Upanishads, Baha'u'llah teaches that we cannot know the essence of God. Any ideas that we may have of God must always be the products of our own limited minds. As God is unlimited and infinite, any ideas that human minds may form cannot be a complete description of God. We find in the writings of Baha'u'llah reflections of the positions also of various Vedanta schools of thought. For example, the dualist school of philosopher theologians such as Madhva, who held that God and creation are utterly different and that the human soul and God remain ever distinct. No tie, this is from Baha'u'llah's gleanings, no tie of direct intercourse can ever bind him, God, to the things that he hath created, nor can the most abstruse and most remote allusions of his creatures do justice to his being. The Advaita Vedanta or non-dualist school, also termed mystical or metaphysical monism, where only Brahman has absolute existence, the world's existence is relative and contingent, of which the philosopher Shankara was the most influential exponent, regards the inner reality of man as the same as Brahman, and teaches that knowledge of Brahman must come through knowledge of the self. In a similar fashion, the Baha'i writings say, "Turn thy sight onto thyself, that thou mayest find me standing within thee, mighty, powerful, and self-subsisting." Now, turning to the concept of the soul, as an omniscient, omnipotent God or being, Brahman cannot be fully comprehended by our finite embodied selves, yet real knowledge about God is possible. The ancient Hindu tradition recognized that this knowledge was obtainable through study of the sacred texts, meditation, through knowledge of the self, and through divine teachers. The search for the hidden interconnection between all things, for the one behind the many, for ultimate reality, recorded in the Upanishads, led to the discovery of the immortal soul, the Atman or Jiva. The seat of the vital powers, of which breath was the most important, was understood to be located in the cavity of the heart. More significantly, the Upanishads reveal that the essence of each human being is this imperishable self or soul, which does not die with the body and which may be identified with Brahman, the cosmic soul. The human soul is described as intangible, indestructible, unbound, finer than the finest, larger than the largest is the self, Atman, that lies here hidden in the heart of a living being. Without desires and free from sorrow, a man perceives by the Creator's grace the grandeur of the self. And in the same Upanishad, it goes on to say, the body and the heart are called the city of Brahman. Yet when old age overtakes it, the soul remains free from evil, age, death, sorrow, hunger, and thirst, for it seeks only reality. Thus, from at least the time of the Upanishads, Hindus have accepted the belief in the existence of the human soul, which is the true divine nature of the person and which persists after the death of the body. Now, the Baha'i writings teach that each human being associates with a unique soul at the time of conception, and that this soul, the essence of our identity, is immortal. We are fundamentally spiritual beings, as Hindus would affirm. Our soul has the capacity to mirror the attributes of God, and our purpose in life is to progressively develop those spiritual attributes and qualities which will assist us not only in this life, but in the next life after death during our continuing spiritual journey. Baha'u'llah compared the human soul to a heavenly gem, suggesting both its preciousness and the idea that when polished through experience, it is able to shine forth and reveal its divine qualities. Yet the nature of the gem itself remains a mystery. Now, turning to the question of avatar, avatara, and manifestation, Hindus and Baha'is would agree that one way to know God is to know ourselves, as I have discussed, that is, to know our spiritual condition, to understand the nature of our true identity. Baha'i teachings, however, place greater emphasis than do Hindus on the role of the manifestation of God, God's divine educators, to enable us to know the will of God. Yet a similar concept of divine educator did emerge in post-Vedic Hinduism. The concept of avatara, or the descent, that's literally what it means, descent of God in human form, articulated most elaborately in Vishnuite theology, allowed for the possibility of divine intervention in human history, an intervention whose purpose is to restore religious or spiritual order, that is, Dharma. As Krishna says in the Bhagavad-Gita, whenever there is a decline of Dharma or righteousness, and a rise of adharma or unrighteousness, O Bharata, that is another name for Arjuna, then I send forth myself for the protection of the good, for the destruction of the wicked, and for the establishment of righteousness. I come into being from age to age. Now, Vishnuite literature describes 10 avatars. Here you have Dash Avatara of the god Vishnu, moving apparently in an evolutionary trajectory from a simpler form to one that is more evolved, beginning with fish, the Matsya, tortoise, Kurma, the man-boar, Varaha, the man-lion, Narasimha, the dwarf, Vamana, Rama with the axe, Rama, Krishna, and the Buddha. The last avatara on most lists is the figure of Kalki, the avatara who will appear at the close of the Kali Yuga, the final and most dissolute of the four great ages in the cosmic eon. The Kalki avatara, depicted usually as a young man on a white horse with a drawn sword, blazing like a comet, is to inaugurate a renewed cycle, starting with the Krita or Satya Yuga, the golden age. The concept of avatara then suggests that humanity requires God's direct intervention to renew religion at various points in their historical development to meet different needs in cycles of rise and decline. It also suggests that one of the important ways to know God is through these divine human teachers. Certainly, this is a crucial tenet of the Baha'i Faith. Though the inmost reality of God is hidden from humanity, Baha'u'llah states, the source of infinite grace hath caused those luminous gems of holiness to appear out of the human temple and be made manifest unto all men, that they may impart unto the world the mysteries of the unchangeable being and tell of the subtleties of his imperishable essence. In language similar to that of Krishna in the Bhagavad-Gita, the manifestations are described as sent to renew religion that has become corrupted. As the body of man needeth a garment to clothe it, so the body of mankind must needs be adorned with the mantle of justice and wisdom. Its robe is the revelation vouchsafed unto it by God. Whenever this robe hath fulfilled its purpose, the Almighty will assuredly renew it. For every age requireth a fresh measure of the light of God. Every divine revelation hath been sent down in a manner that befitteth the circumstances of the age in which it hath appeared. Now let me say a little bit more about Krishna. Since the name Krishna is specifically identified as a prophet of God in the writings of Shoghi Effendi, it is important to review what is known of his historical identity. Sometime before the 6th century BCE, there arose a religious reformer of the Kshatriya or warrior class in the governing class in the northwest of India named Sri Krishna, son of Vasudeva, who preached a theistic faith. Beyond this, evidence for the historical Krishna is sparse. The Mahabharata, this great epic, provides some details on a Krishna Vasudeva, head of the Vrishni clan of Mathura, who fights evil kings for control in the Mathura region, and who eventually establishes himself in Dwarka on the shores of the Arabian Sea. At some point, Krishna Vasudeva is identified with a cowherd or divinized figure, Krishna Gopala, worshipped by the nomadic Abira clan in northwestern India. This identification furnished the content for the lively and much beloved stories of the cowherd god Krishna's miracle-filled childhood and adolescence in Mathura and Vrindavan. These stories found written form and were steadily elaborated through the centuries of the first millennium CE, coincidental with the increasingly widespread following of the Krishna Bhagavata cult. Now, theologically, the monotheistic religion of Sri Krishna Vasudeva had come to be combined with the Vedic cult of Vishnu Narayana in the centuries just prior to the Common Era. So eventually, Krishna was identified as an avatar of the supreme God Vishnu Bhagavan. And in the Bhagavad-Gita, Krishna reveals an identity, as I had sort of suggested before, far more majestic, indeed transcendent, than is shown in the rest of the Mahabharata, where he is, in the main narrative, merely the friend and wise counselor of the 5 Pandava heroes, including Arjuna. In the Gita, he identifies himself with the omnipotent, omniscient Lord from whom all things and all beings have emanated, and in whom all subsist. The whole universe is pervaded by my unmanifest form. All creatures exist in me, but I do not exist in them, says the Gita in chapter 9. From the time of the Bhagavad-Gita on, then, the turn of the Common Era, Krishna is essentially divinized and remains today, while an avatar of the god Vishnu, also an object of veneration and worship in his own right. Now, let me turn to a few key concepts and practices. First of all, I'll talk about moksha. According to the Upanishads and other Hindu texts, the ultimate goal for a human being is to achieve moksha, or liberation from the cycle of rebirth. Now, the idea of reincarnation of the soul was introduced in the Upanishads. It was believed that to truly know the self, to know Brahman, is almost impossible in one lifetime. The Upanishads relate the transmigration of the soul into another body to the concepts of karma, the law of cause and effect, and of samsara, mundane existence, or the recurrent round of birth, death, and rebirth. The doctrine of transmigration not only affirms life after death and a physical rebirth, but also life before birth, a pre-existence. The Bhagavad-Gita compares the rebirth of a soul after death to its continuity through the changing phases of our bodies during our lifetimes. As the spirit of our mortal body wanders on in childhood and youth and old age, the spirit wanders on to a new body. The wheel of rebirth is both fueled and directed by the law of karma. Now, the term karma means deeds or actions, while in the Vedas, the term karma applied principally to sacrifices and sacred actions. Later, it was enlarged to include action with a moral connotation tied to the notion of rebirth. This moral connotation of the law of karma is encapsulated in the statement of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, verily one becomes good through good deeds and evil through evil deeds. Or, you act what you think, you become what you act. Phrased in this way, Baha'is would generally agree. Where Baha'is would have to disagree is with the notion that the sum total of a person's desires or volitions and deeds in the present life determine his or her predisposition, character, and social status in the next physical life. Rather, as was discussed earlier with respect to the nature of the soul, one's behavior in this life affects the condition of one's soul in both this life and on into the next phase of non-corporeal existence. We only have one embodied life to live, and this is our arena for service and the development of our moral capacities. Now, Shoghi Effendi, writing in response to an individual, explained that Baha'i teachings reject the concept of physical reincarnation. He said, "We come onto this planet once only. Our life here is like the baby in the womb of its mother, which develops in that state what is necessary for its entire life after it is born. The same is true of us. Spiritually, we must develop here what we will require for the life after death. In that future life, God, through his mercy, can help us to evolve characteristics which we neglected to develop while we were on this earthly plane." It is not necessary, he continues, for us to come back and be born into another body in order to advance spiritually and grow closer to God. Now, as release from the cycle of rebirth became the goal in Hinduism, asceticism, especially yoga practices, and mystical gnosis became a principal means to achieving this goal. The Bhagavad-Gita reframed the concept of karma as non-attached right action, doing one's duty, good deeds, without concern about effects or rewards. The text also introduced the path of devotional love, bhakti, to God as a means of obtaining release from the cycle of rebirth, and further introduced the idea that God's grace could intervene in overcoming the negative effects of karma. Other texts, notably the socially prescriptive text called the Dharma Shastras, emphasize living a good life in accordance with the principles of Dharma as being sufficient for Hindus. Moksha, then, is a distant goal, incrementally achieved life by life. Now, very briefly, I'll turn to Hindu Dharma and then finally to the Baha'i Faith in India, also very briefly. The term Dharma is arguably the most important concept in Hinduism. The term literally means what holds together or that which sustains. In general, Dharma is the basis of all order, cosmic, ritualistic, social, and moral. There are three principal forms of Dharma articulated in Hindu texts. First is Sadharana Dharma, which is the code of ethical conduct binding on all peoples and includes such prescriptions as truthfulness, compassion, charity, purity, self-control, and refraining from evil deeds such as stealing and causing injury to others. These sorts of ethical rules governing human interaction form the core of all the major world religions and are reaffirmed in the Baha'i Faith. Next is the Varnashrama Dharma, which refers to the specific duties appropriate to one's class, Varna, and stage in life, Ashrama. The Baha'i Faith rejects any birth-based class status. In light of the evolutionary nature of religion and human society, the Baha'i Faith teaches that certain attitudes, practices, and conventions require revision over time in accordance with the changing and maturing needs of a society or humankind as a whole. It is each succeeding manifestation of God who sets out the new social pattern. Then there is Swadharma, which refers to the duties and path appropriate to the inherent nature of each individual. Now, gender and personality type play a role here. The Baha'i Faith acknowledges biological differences between the sexes, yet also affirms their equality. inherent differences between people cannot predetermine their roles in society. Now, for Hindus, the emphasis on social dharma, everyone keeping to their prescribed roles in a closed system with a long view of time, enabled them to resist to some extent the influence of other religions entering India, including Christianity and Islam. It has also meant an entrenched social conservatism that has been resistant to change, as Mahatma Gandhi discovered when he attempted to reform the Hindu caste system and the treatment of so-called untouchables. And finally, a few words about the Baha'i Faith in India. Baha'i teachers from Persia began to bring the new faith to the Indian subcontinent around 1875. Since then, the faith has slowly grown, and its core activities are now widespread throughout the countries of India and Nepal. Participation in the study circles, children's classes, and junior youth groups is helping to transform age-old attitudes around gender norms and caste prejudices, and to contribute to education, self-development, social cohesion in countless villages. There are also some 10 Baha'i-inspired schools that have developed in India, a Baha'i chair for social studies and development at Devi Ahilya University in Indore. Now, Baha'is in India have striven to render the Baha'i faith meaningful to people of a Hindu background by employing traditional Hindu forms of religiosity, reinterpreting the meaning of Hindu symbols, and emphasizing the eschatological or prophetic elements in the Hindu tradition. The most striking example of the use and reinterpretation of a Hindu symbol is the internationally acclaimed Baha'i Temple of Bahapur in New Delhi, constructed in the shape of a lotus. The image of the lotus flower is ubiquitous in Indian culture. In Hindu mythology, the lotus is a complex symbol associated with the creation of a new world cycle, with the life-giving potential of water, with purity, beauty, and transcendence. In some Upanishads, the lotus symbolizes the purity of the soul, untainted by its muddy surroundings, the ephemeral physical world. It is also a characteristic sign of the god Vishnu, the preserver of order, as well as of Lakshmi, goddess of prosperity and good fortune. Many of these meanings are significant for Baha'is. The lotus temple symbolizes, for example, God's kingdom on earth, or the beauty, purity, and glory of God's manifestations, unblemished by the corruption of the world, or the reestablishment of spiritual truth amidst decay. The second example of the use of the form of traditional Hindu devotional songs called bhajans. A bhajan is a rhythmic song that extols in a devotional manner the deeds of gods and saints. Bhajans are often sung in small groups in a home or a temple, with one person leading the song and the others joining in the refrain. Now, in northern India, Rama and Krishna are the figures glorified the most often in these songs. And in Baha'i bhajans that were developed in the 1970s, especially in some in the 1980s, Baha'u'llah is glorified as an avatar of God, sometimes explicitly as Kalki, the avatara who will appear at the close of the Kali Yuga to inaugurate the Satya Yuga, the Golden Age. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne.
Right.
I get my video started here. Thank you very much for that fantastic summary. And have you any comment about the Gandhi's comment you have on this last slide?
Well, I mean, Gandhi had heard about the faith. He learned about the faith through some Baha'i teachers in India, and how much he studied, how much he really understood about it, I am not sure.
Yeah.
But he did apparently say that this phrase, that it is a solace to humankind. I'm sure he would have seen, even on a superficial level, so much overlap between his own beliefs and the Baha'i faith.
Mm-hmm. And I assume this lower picture is you that you're there right there in front of the temple.
That's right, with one of my daughters. Yeah, a few years ago.
That's nice. I think I just got a notice of a question. I've got to figure out how to find it here. Sue asks, what is perhaps the greatest misunderstanding about Hinduism among unknowing followers of later religions? And then she says, I just understood that the Baha'i temple in New Delhi was built on what was regarded to be untouchable land. Can you talk about the significance of it as it has become known as the Lotus Temple?
Okay, so the first question was the biggest misunderstanding, or
the greatest misunderstanding about Hinduism among people of other religions or later religions?
I would say the nature of God and the divine, which is why I spent a little bit more time in this talk discussing that. Muslims and Christians in particular were rather appalled when they arrived in India to see this plethora of images of the divine being worshipped in so many different ways, and saw it as idolatry and as a very primitive way of encountering the divine. They really often did not understand how sophisticated and rich Hinduism's concepts of the divine are. With respect to the other question on untouchable land, it's significant that around many urban centers in India, you find untouchable villages because, of course, for centuries, they were not allowed to be in the center of towns or villages, and they had to live apart because they were literally untouchable, and they would go into the town or village or city to do the work that no one else would do. So when the temple property was purchased, New Delhi, it was really on the outskirts of New Delhi. It was surrounded by land that was, there were a few villages, but no city at that time. And yes, some of these villages were untouchable villages. And so it does make a kind of statement that everyone is welcomed and included without distinction in the Baha'i faith.
Interesting. Jay asks, the list of avatars included Buddha as the 9th avatar. Does this mean that Hindus accept Buddha but don't follow Buddhism?
Yeah, that's a good question. Now, I should say that there are different lists historically of the avatars, and the Buddha is not always included in those lists, but he is included more often than not. And there are different ways to interpret this. On a positive note, it's that inclusiveness of Hinduism to say, the Buddha is another of an avatar, another descent of God, and his teachings are to be honored as such. And we accept all forms of faith that honor the divine. On another perspective, it was a way for Hindus to absorb Buddhism, because Buddhism died out in India, certainly by the 13th century. But it was already dying out for a number of centuries before that. So many Hindus had become Buddhists, and then many of those Buddhists became Hindus again. So that now there's a very tiny number of Buddhists in India. So I think I answered. Was there another part of that question?
No. Oh, well, does that mean Hindus accept the Buddha but don't follow Buddhism? I think you answered that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I understand that the development of bhakti as a form of Hinduism really helped to limit and eventually wipe out Buddhism. That's one thing I've heard. That
Yes, and again, that Bhakti movement, which emerges after the Bhagavad-Gita. So the Bhagavad-Gita is, as I said very, very briefly, outlines Bhakti, or devotional love of God, as a way to achieve moksha, to achieve that final goal. And the Bhagavad-Gita also allows the means to worship God to be very, very simple. Just a flower, a fruit, some incense, the Bhagavad-Gita says, is sufficient. It's purity of heart that matters. And I think that led to a very, a reclaiming of a new kind of Hinduism that was very appealing to the general populace.
Kay asks, I've always been interested in the class culture in India. How do our Baha'i brothers and sisters deal with it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, as I said, even Gandhi, who worked on this for decades, he made some headway in so far as he went on several campaigns to change some temple policies that would not allow untouchables into the temple. It's been very, very difficult to break down this class structure. It's like sexism and racism, very, very difficult to break through. But because there's such an incredibly strong emphasis in the Baha'i Faith on equality and on an emphasis on the dignity of every human being, then that becomes the starting point with which you interact with people. Baha'is are, I think the process is happening from what I understand, but it is organic, and so it'll still, it doesn't happen automatically, and because any prejudice you hold and have grown up holding is difficult to dislodge right away.
Yeah. Sue also asks, would you explain why some people were treated as untouchables?
Yeah. Well, one of the Tamil words for untouchable is pariah, which entered, like many Indian words, entered into the English language, pariah. So pariah is someone who lives literally on the outskirts. The caste system itself does not have much support in the Vedas. The Vedas hardly say anything about it at all. There's only one verse in the entire corpus of Vedic texts which even mentions the four varnas, the classes. And it seems that this is a social system that became entrenched over time, over the centuries, and became actually even more entrenched when the Muslims came into India, and then when the Brits came into India. And so the untouchables are not mentioned at all in the earliest texts. They start to become mentioned in texts like the Dharma Shastras, which are texts on righteousness, on duty, that are much more pragmatic. And so they're descriptive as well as prescriptive. So we know that there are different words used. Chamars, for example, another word for untouchable. You find this class that doesn't fit in those four categories, and they may have been people who were indigenous, the so-called tribals in India, nomadic peoples who were sort of brought into the Indian fold, as it were, the Hindu fold, I should say, and then made to do the jobs that no one else wanted to do, and thereby become highly stigmatized.
Hmm. Sounds like the condition of immigrant farm workers.
Yeah.
In some ways.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
but it becomes institutionalized over
Yes.
centuries. Vahid says, how do Hindus see Christ and Muhammad?
Well, in some Indic languages, Christ is referred to as Isa, and Christianity has been in India since the very earliest centuries of the history of Christianity. In fact, allegedly since the first century CE, there have been Christians in India, especially on the southern coast in Kerala, and then Muslims have been in India since about the 10th century, especially 11th century, especially on, and now make up at least 11% of the population of India. So, by and large, Christians we're treated with respect. The Christian population is only about 2% of, or even less of the Indian population right now. So they didn't have a huge success in converting, and that's partly because when it was suggested to Hindus that they convert to Christ, they would say, well, he sounds like a wonderful man, like an avatar of Vishnu, and we'll just respect him that way. There's no need to change religions for that. With Islam, it was a little bit different because the Muslims came in as for economic reasons and then for political reasons. And so they ended up conquering much of the country. And so the divisions and distrust between Hindus and others and Muslims in India was much stronger than with Christians, at least initially. Nevertheless, I mean, Hindus have a reputation historically for being very tolerant, and I think that reputation is earned.
Someone else anonymously, well, actually, I'll start with Mitra's comment. Mitra notes that if you take the symbol Om and turn it sideways, you can read it as Allah or Abha, and it's quite amazing, she says.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I never noticed that either. An anonymous person asks, what are the most convincing proofs of the Baha'i Faith for those who follow Hinduism?
I find that a very difficult question to answer because, as I've tried to suggest, Hinduism has been a religion of orthopraxis more than orthodoxy. So coming along with proofs that refer to specific propositions of belief may not necessarily go very far. So I think actually that the core activities, the junior youth programs, the children's classes, the devotional gatherings and the study circles are what is starting to make the most difference in animating the growing Baha'i community in India. But as for specific proofs, I mean, I made reference to referring to Baha'u'llah as an avatar of Vishnu, as being the Kalki avatara. But to be honest, there have been lots of other gurus who have made this claim in the 19th and 20th and into the 21st centuries, that they are the Kalki avatara. So, that might not always work as something to convince people.
Sure. Sue asks a more general question. Why are there 9 doors, 9 gardens, 9 fountains, and 9 paths leading into the Baha'i houses of worship? What does that signify, especially in New Delhi, India, for example, where there has been such interreligious misunderstanding and strife?
Well, I mean, this temple is Bahapur, this has become one of the most popular, I'm sure most of you know this, the most popular tourist destinations in all of India. 5 to 6 million people a year is an astronomical number, hard to imagine. And of course, the vast majority of those people are Hindus. And, you know, I've been to the temple myself a number of times, and I seem to, you know, I encounter Hindus who just, of all walks of life, in fact, all backgrounds, who just seem to appreciate the beauty of the temple, and its lotus shape is extremely attractive. And as for the 9 sides, well, you know, I'd have to investigate that more, what the 9 might symbolize for Hindus. Certainly India is, you know, is responsible for important developments in the field of mathematics and geometry and astronomy. So there may be all kinds of things that one could uncover about the number 9 that are important to Hindus, but I don't think I can tell you off the top of my head.
We have a few more questions that keep coming in, which is good to see. Wayne asks this very interesting question. Are some of the ancient chants and bhajans, how do you pronounce it? Bhajans, right?
Bhajan,
chanted in the Lotus Temple, Hindu ones chanted in the Lotus Temple, for example, is Om chanted in the Lotus Temple, or the Gayatri Mantra. He says, a very good talk, excellent thumbnail sketch of the very vast and complex culture and its practices.
Well, thank you. Yes, I believe the Gayatri Mantra has been chanted in the temple. There's no intrinsic reason for any of the Mashrikalaskars, the continental houses of worship in the world, the Baha'i ones, that one cannot share scripture from other faiths. And the Gayatri Mantra in particular is from the Vedas, and is held as one of the most sacred mantras around. And as for bhajans, well, both Baha'i and Hindu bhajans have been sung in the temple, as far as I know.
Another question from Sue. This is a good one, I think. What are the Vedas in relationship to Krishna and Hinduism?
Yeah. Well, Krishna is not mentioned in the Vedas. So as I was trying to explain, you know, the Krishna we have today is an amalgam of several figures historically, although he's not thought of that way, certainly by Hindus, who many of whom consider him, you know, the form of the divine himself, not even an avatar, but actually the divine. So they would certainly not object to seeing Krishna as historically an amalgam figure. However, that seems to be the case, that we first of all really don't know a whole lot about the historical Krishna. But the Bhagavad-Gita, which is attributed to him, is a text that is you know, is around 2,000 years old. So that's about 1,000 or so years after the Vedas came along. So the question is, you know, did Krishna come before the Vedas? Well, there is no evidence for that. Then, okay, if he came after the Vedas, then what is the status of the Vedas? Well, they're considered books of knowledge, and I think they have to be respected as that. Most Hindus have no idea what's in the Vedas. They don't read them. They would far more likely read the Bhagavad-Gita or other sacred texts that came much later, not the Vedas. But the Vedas are extremely important still for ritual purposes. So you wouldn't get married without Vedic mantras being chanted or cremated or any of the other life cycle ceremonies.
Oh, that's very interesting. That was a distinction I didn't know about. That's very interesting. And the Vedas were heard on the wind, it seems to me. That's my understanding of the concept of revelation in the case of the Vedas.
Yeah, that's right. They're considered shruti, which means literally that which was heard. So scripture in Hinduism, which again is a vast corpus of texts, is divided into two sections. Shruti, that which is the most sacred, and that is revelation, that which is heard, and it is transmitted most importantly orally. So the Vedas were not written down for many, many centuries, because that was to demean them. You needed to, the sacredness was in the chanting, the echoing, because there's so many mantras in the Vedas. It's the chanting itself that sets up vibrations in the atmosphere, in the universe, that has spiritual effect. So you would always chant them. And smriti then refers to that which is remembered. And so this is a whole other corpus of texts. And the Bhagavad-Gita and the Mahabharata itself, this great epic in which you find that Bhagavad-Gita sometimes is considered shruti, sometimes smriti, depending on who you're reading or talking to.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I think the other thing that's probably worth mentioning, since Baha'is have this vision of Krishna as this manifestation of God, sort of possibly or probably, is the erotic Krishna, which is an aspect of Krishna that Baha'is might be a bit shocked to hear about. He supposedly has 10,000 consorts and 100,000 sons and all this kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I said the concept of the divine in Hinduism is rich and includes everything under the sun. So it includes erotic elements of life, and it includes horrific ones. So some of the images of goddesses, for example, are in extremely horrific forms. Very notably, the goddess Kali, who's, wears this garland of skulls around her and has a lolling tongue dripping blood and so on. But it's a recognition that all aspects of life are somehow related also to the divine, that you can't separate the mundane and the divine, as religions in the West sometimes try to do, or Abrahamic religions. That separation is not clear at all. And for Krishna, a lot of the songs, the stories about Krishna Gopala, Krishna the cowherd god, hiding out in the woods and meeting up with the various gopis, the cowherd women, and engaging in illicit erotic behavior, was framed as being the longing of the soul for union with God. And so, it's akin to the Song of Songs in the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah. And there's a marvelous scene in Passage to India where this young British woman rides her bicycle out to a Hindu temple that's surrounded in trees and everything. And she sees all these gods and goddesses in the middle of coitus, I guess you could say, stone statues of them having sex. And she's quite shocked. And at the same time, the monkeys in the temple start throwing fruit at her, and she flees from the temple. You're not quite sure whether she's fleeing from the eroticism or fleeing from the monkeys.
Yeah.
But it is certainly an aspect of Hinduism that can quite shock people until they understand and put it in a context, it seems. Kay says, the Hindus' tolerance of other faiths has always impressed me. But lately, through the media, there's clearly a lot of Hindu fundamentalists and a lot of intolerance. Comments, please.
Yeah. Yes, quite right. Since the late 19th century, sort of parallel with the rise of the independence movement in India, you saw a rise in an ideology that was expressed in terms of India is the holy land of the Hindus. India is Hindu. Hindus are India. So this redefining of what Hinduism is, and even a creation of a set of propositions, a set of beliefs that Hindus believe that Hindus should accept. That this has been developing over the last 100 or so years, and it has it's really taken very frightening forms. It's very, like all forms of religious nationalism, can be extremely intolerant, extremely judgmental, and willing to allow the ends to justify the means. In fact, you know, I was reading a book just the other day. I don't know if I have time to just include a passage from it on this topic. Let's see, where did I put it? This is from Savarkar, who wrote Golwalkar. So Savarkar was one of the first ideologues in the early 20th century, and Golwalkar followed him a little bit later in providing the ideology of Hindutva, which is Hindu-ness ideology, which is Hindu nationalism. He, for example, writes, "We in the Sangh," this is the family of Hindus, are Hindus to the core. That's why we have respect for all faiths and religious beliefs. But the question before us now is, what is the attitude of those people who have been converted to Islam or Christianity? They are born in this land, no doubt, but are they true to its salt? Are they grateful towards this land which has brought them up? Do they feel that they are the children of this land and its traditions, and that to serve it is their great good fortune? Do they feel it is a duty to serve her? No. Together with the change in their faith, gone are the spirit of love and devotion for the nation. So in statements like that, you hear that, you know, this suspicion about any religion that wasn't born in India. And this is starting to infect, certainly it's already infected political discourse a great deal, because the BJP party is a Hindu nationalist party right now. So I won't say anything more about that, but it's a dangerous trend.
Sure, of course. Mitra says, is it appropriate to adopt the yogic meditation to our meditation as a Baha'i, as we do not have directions to meditate? The yoga practice trains one to unite with Brahman and to know Atman.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, I think that's up to each individual to determine. I certainly wouldn't want to be definitive. I myself have adopted I do yoga on a regular basis. I practice yoga and also meditation, and I've learned a lot from yoga teachers, meditation teachers from the Hindu tradition, and also my own reading of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, written some 2,000 years ago. So I think there's a lot we can learn from Hinduism and Eastern religions, and you know, adopt some of the practices.
I have a question myself, and that's, how are you continuing to study Hinduism, and how is it continuing to influence your life?
Well, you know, I first became interested in Hinduism when I lived in India and went to high school. So because my father was a diplomat and we were posted to India, and I happened to be between the ages of 12 and 15, very, that junior youth age, I was very influenced by being in India. And kind of fell in love with the country. And so I went back and spent a year after my third year of university, and then subsequently, of course, went on and did a PhD in Hinduism. But I've always felt that you just cannot ever stop learning about Hinduism. I'm always learning new things about it. And I find, here's a sort of pitch for Hinduism for deepening and dialogue. The more you learn about another religion and are in conversation with another religion, the more it helps you to reflect on your own religion, your own beliefs. It only deepens and expands your understanding and your appreciation for your own religion as well as others.
That's why we call these courses deepening and dialogue, exactly, because the more you learn about other traditions, the more you learn about your own as well. They have the questions that you might not have thought of that your tradition does often address. And so you see aspects of your own faith by studying other faiths as well. Certainly that's been my impression. Judith says, the Guardian advised that meditation should not be taught at Baha'i schools because it would create confusion about the teachings of the Baha'i faith. But so that's a different issue. That's not the issue of whether one can use it personally or not, of course. And we have a few people saying, I think it's Bronwyn saying, thank you very much. Sue says, beautiful, Dr. Pearson. Thank you. Namaste. And Kay also says, beautiful presentation, very thorough. Thank you very much. So we had several thank yous, and it looks like we've hit the bottom of, well, maybe not. This may go down farther. Oh, yeah, here's a couple more questions. They pop in at the bottom. I have to move the cursor to find them. William says, I understand the successor to Sri Aurobindo was known as the mother, was a French woman who attended the Paris talks and had a photo of Abdu'l-Baha in her room at the ashram.
Yeah, that's right.
You've heard that?
Is there a question?
Huh?
Is there a question around that?
That's the question. I suppose, do you know if that's true, I guess is the question.
Oh, do I know if it's true? Okay, I've heard that. But no, that's something I've been meaning to investigate. So no, I don't know for sure that that's true.
And Nishita asks, can we get a recording of this awesome session? And yes, of course, we will have it up on our YouTube channel, and we will let people know the URL, the address of it, as soon as we can in the next few days. So that will certainly be done. I think that may be all of our questions. And so I think I will thank you again very much for this really marvelous session. And certainly you provoked some very interesting questions, and we got a good discussion out of it. So thank you, Anne, really very, very much. We very much appreciate this, and we're all looking forward to the course when it starts on the 10th in 2 days, which is about the third or fourth time we've taught, or fifth time or sixth time. I don't know. It's been a while. So we will look forward to that, and we hope more people will be happy to register